It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this important teach-in event titled Academic Freedom Under Attack, How We Can Fight Back Together. My name is Audrey Truschke. I'm professor of history at Rutgers Newark, and I'm also chair of the full-time union's Academic Freedom Committee. We are currently facing the most intense onslaught of assaults against academic freedom that anyone has witnessed in a few generations. Those attacks are coming from external entities as well as from our own administration. Because Rutgers is a public university, we are obligated to uphold First Amendment rights of free expression. And so for us here at Rutgers, academic freedom and freedom of speech do quite often intersect. To talk a little bit more about these issues, to define them, to think about what the problems are and how we can proceed in the current environment, we have with us today 4 fabulous speakers. They're each going to present for 10 minutes. Speakers, please stick to your times. And we will be recording those presentations for those who are unable to join us at this moment. After the speakers, we will then have a fairly extensive Q&A and feedback session, and that will not be recorded. I'm going to introduce the 4 speakers now, and then after their presentations, my colleague and counterpart, Hank Kalet, who leads our lecturer union's Academic Freedom Committee, will moderate the Q&A portion. Hank also deserves credit for organizing this event. So our first speaker today is Schrecker, who is Professor Emerita of American History at Yeshiva University. She's received the Frederick Ewan Academic Freedom Fellowship at the Tammy Mentz Library of NYU, and Dr. Schrecker is widely recognized as a leading expert on McCarthyism. Her latest book, The Lost Promise: American Universities was published in 2021 by University of Chicago Press. Our second speaker is Sahar Aziz. Dr. Aziz is Distinguished Professor of Law, Middle East Legal Studies Scholar, and Chancellor's Social Justice Scholar at Rutgers University Law School. Professor Aziz's scholarship examines the intersection of national security, race, religion, and civil rights, with a focus on the adverse impact of national security laws and policies on racial, religious, and ethnic minorities. She's the author of the book, The Racial Muslim: When Racism Quashes Religious Freedom, and she's also founding director of the much acclaimed Center for Security, Race, and Rights. Our third speaker today is Donna Murch. Dr. Murch is Associate Professor of History at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, and the former president of the New Brunswick chapter of Rutgers AAUP from 2020 to 24. In October of 2010, Dr. Murch published Living for the City: Migration, Education, and the Rise of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California, with the University of North Carolina Press. This book then won the Phyllis Wheatley Prize in December 2020. Dr. Murch's newest book, Assata Taught Me: State Violence, Racial Capitalism, and the Movement for Black Lives, was published by Haymarket Books in March of 2022. Our fourth and final speaker today is Elyla Huertas from ACLU, New Jersey. Elyla Huertas is senior staff attorney at the ACLU of New Jersey, where she conducts litigation and advocacy on a range of civil rights issues and civil liberties issues. Attorneys don't tend to give as long of bios as academics, but we are thrilled to have Ms. Huertas with us. So without further ado, I will turn over the floor to Professor Schrecker, who will take us off.
I have to unmute myself. Here is my most recent book. I think it's relevant: The Right to Learn, Resisting the Right-Wing Attack on Academic Freedom. And of course, that's what I'm going to be talking about, as I had been for many years. And I want to begin by comparing what happened during the McCarthy era that I've written a lot about and today. And the main thing I want to say today is that it's much worse than McCarthyism. Much, much worse. And it's worse for 2 reasons. First, because it's affecting a much broader spectrum of academic activities. And second, because the academic community is in a much weaker condition than it was during the 1950s. But in order to understand all of this, we have to look at what happened in both eras. And in both eras, the political repression that reached higher education was propelled by networks of aggressive right-wing ideologues and Republican politicians. During the late 1940s and 50s, those networks wanted to roll back the New Deal. Today's right-wingers want to enhance the political power of corporate actors and implement neoliberal policies that would privatize the public sector and undermine the welfare state. But because the American people don't exactly support that agenda, the reactionary networks are diverting attention from their undemocratic goals by creating and disseminating a largely falsified portrayal of supposed threats to American society and its traditional culture. But in the late 1940s and 50s, the threat that was invoked was the essentially non-existent danger of domestic communism. Today, it's higher education, demonized specifically by the likes of J.D. Vance as elitist and left-wing. Now, during the McCarthy era, more than 100 professors were fired and blacklisted. Like most of McCarthyism's victims, these unfortunate academics were not, quote unquote, innocent liberals, but had some kind of previous affiliation or association with the communist movement and refused to cooperate with the witch hunt. But they were punished only because of their alleged connections to communism. At no point were any of these faculty members asked about their teaching and research. The taint of communism was so powerful that the institutions that employed these people felt compelled to let them go, even though they had broken no laws and done nothing to harm our country or their students. The academic leaders who purged their faculties justified those actions by relying on the early Cold War's demonized portrayal of communism. If communists, as that wildly exaggerated scenario had it, were robots under Kremlin control, then they were, therefore, by definition, incapable of unbiased teaching and research. And therefore, again, by definition, they didn't deserve the protections of academic freedom. Now, the authorities did not explicitly censure people's classrooms and scholarship, but their activities had a chilling effect. The professors pruned their syllabi and stopped teaching about controversial subjects. Today, that chill is back. This is especially the case in red states, where ambitious politicians are cracking down on all sorts of educational activities. Unlike McCarthyism, which only affected individual faculty members and their careers, this new wave of political repression targets classrooms, tenure, academic programs, accreditation, libraries, and even, as in the case of New College, Florida, entire institutions. So how did this happen? How did we find ourselves in this position where all of higher education faces such an existential threat? Now, the current iteration of the witch hunt began 4 years ago in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter movement, when Donald Trump and the Republican right launched an attack on anti-racist education. Though Trump lost the 2020 election, his campaign against teaching the truth about our country's less than glorious past and present has moved to the states. Ambitious right-wing politicians began to flood their legislatures with dozens of so-called educational gag orders. These measures initially focused on K-12 education, but they soon targeted the university, adding new force to an ongoing culture war against higher education. First came attacks on teaching about racism, sexism, and other forms of oppression that might make conservative, straight, white male undergraduates feel, quote unquote, uncomfortable. Then came an attack on sexuality. This led to measures against gender studies and similar programs, along with attacks on campus support for LGBTQ and other vulnerable students. DEI programs are also under attack. And since October 7, many states, and not just red states, are intensifying an already ongoing campaign against pro-Palestinian activities by attacking, quote unquote, anti-Semitism. But the anti-Semitism that they're targeting is based on a definition promoted by a Zionist organization that calls any criticism of Israel anti-Semitic. And as in the McCarthy era, trustees and top administrators do not resist these attacks, but capitulate to them, creating an unprecedentedly repressive atmosphere on their own campuses. Now, what makes the current attack on the university so much more dangerous than McCarthyism is not only because it focuses directly on higher education, but also because the academy is much less able to fight back. To begin with, higher education has been on the defensive ever since a wealthy collection of ultra-conservative billionaires and ideologues like the Koch brothers took advantage of a backlash against the student unrest of the 60s to move American political culture to the right. They did this by discrediting and taking over the mainstream institutions of American civil society. This includes the universities, of course, but also the legal system and the media. Over the next 50 years, that plutocratic campaign poured hundreds of millions of dollars into creating an alternative system of think tanks, public intellectuals, and conservative professors and programs designed to replace mainstream academic knowledge as a source of expertise for policymakers, politicians, and the media. In particular, that network manufactured the culture wars of the late 1980s and 90s that convinced much of the public that universities were dominated by tenured radicals and weak-willed administrators who let so-called political correctness infect their campuses. And to make things worse, years of rising tuitions, creating nearly $1.8 trillion of student debt, have further undermined the public's support for an increasingly endangered system of higher education. But what really makes today so much worse than McCarthyism is that the academy has been so debilitated by the structural transformations of the past 50 years that it is in no condition to resist the campaign against it. McCarthyism occurred during the so-called golden age of American higher education, when universities were highly respected and generously funded by governments at every level as they sought to accommodate an expected tsunami of baby boomers. 20 years later, however, the combination of a backlash against student unrest and the economic crunch of the 1970s ended that unstinting support. As college administrators adjusted to a neoliberal regime of manufactured austerity, they focused increasingly on their bottom lines, while at the same time rejecting faculty input as, quote unquote, inefficient. As a result, they came to rely on attracting tuition-paying students and wealthy donors, much more heavily than on paying attention to the instructional side of their business. At the same time, administrations have grown. They've grown so large that there are now more administrators on campus than faculty members. That's right, more administrators than professors. And especially after COVID, the quality of higher education has noticeably deteriorated. Meanwhile, the faculty's composition has changed enormously. Today, 75% of the nation's instructional workforce is in the hands of non-tenured track faculty members, poorly paid, part-time, and temporary gig workers. They are as skilled and credentialed as their more secure colleagues, but they're treated like second-class citizens without offices or professional support for their teaching or research. Worst of all, job security, and thus no academic freedom. They can be fired for any reason or for no reason at all. So naturally, they're the first to go whenever powerful outsiders demand a purge. Their students and colleagues also suffer. And in such a situation, faculty morale understandably plummets, and the relationships between trustees and top administrators on the one hand and their academic employees on the other becomes increasingly fraught. Under these conditions, how can today's atomized and demoralized academy preserve its integrity? Let's talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sahar Aziz is our next speaker.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on this very important topic that for me and people within my community, Muslims, Arabs, South Asians, and Palestinians, these concerns are not merely abstract or academic, they are very real, and they have caused us a significant amount of emotional suffering, harassment, and even in my case, death threats. So what we're experiencing is very serious and very grave. So I am going to use a PowerPoint in order to provide a perspective, a lived experience perspective as the executive director of the Center for Security, Race, and Rights, which is housed at Rutgers Law School. It is one of 14 academic centers at Rutgers Law School, and it is the only one that has been targeted, harassed, smeared, and I think subjected to tortious interference. But no other law center has done so. So let me see if I can share my screen. All right. So first, I want to identify kind of the key takeaways. It's very important to understand that in terms of the way in which Professor Schrecker's comments are being operationalized, or her warnings are operationalized, is based on anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia. This is what is driving the attacks on academic freedom in American higher education right now, and specifically since October 7th, 2023. What you have are Republican politicians who are exploiting pervasive anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia to further a broader anti-liberal arts education and an anti-DEI education. You also have American Zionist organizations who are actively interfering in the administration of higher education through lawfare, donor coercion, and public smear campaigns against university presidents and faculty members. The first targets of these attacks by Republican politicians, American Zionist organizations, and those who hold anti-Palestinian racist and Islamophobic views are Palestinian Arab Muslim students and faculty, myself included, which then sets a precedent for violating academic freedom and free speech rights of anti-Zionist Jewish students and professors, which we're also starting to see at many universities. Finally, I will give you a little bit of information about the attacks that the Rutgers Law Center for Security, Race, and Rights has experienced. And in my view, and based on my assessment, we are experiencing these attacks, and I am personally being smeared, harassed, and subjected to death threats by people who self-identify as Zionists because of the mission of CSRR, which is to combat Islamophobia and racism against Arabs and South Asians, which includes anti-Palestinian racism. So listen to that perversity. The very thing we are trying to counter in society through this academic civil rights center is the very thing that the center is experiencing and that the Muslim Arab executive director is experiencing. So first, let me just be very clear in case there is any doubt. There are 5 common Islamophobic racist tropes. When you hear them, your alarm should go off. It's a red flag. It's a racist slur. When Muslims are accused of terrorism or supporting terrorism or being terrorists, that is a racist slur. When Muslims are accused of being hateful and violent, that is a racist slur. When Muslims are accused of being illiberal and anti-democratic, that's a racist slur. When Muslims are accused of being misogynistic and anti-women, that's a racist slur. And finally, when Muslims are presumed to be anti-Semitic, that's a racist slur. All of these are slurs because they rarely involve evidence. Obviously, if there is specific evidence and specific facts that show an individual fits one of these categories, then we're not in the space of racist slurs. But that is not what usually happens. And as a result, anti-Palestinian racist tropes often mirror Islamophobic tropes. So these are the types of racist tropes that Palestinians are accused of when they defend their own humanity. And I will just put a pitch in or plug in for the Center for Security, Race, and Rights' report, Presumptively Anti-Semitic Islamophobic Tropes in the Palestine-Israel Discourse, which you can read at csrr.rutgers.edu. Okay, so why are they attacking the Center for Security, Race, and Rights? There are many reasons, but the three main reasons are the mission of the center, as I stated, is to engage in research, education, and advocacy on law and policy that adversely impact the civil and human rights of America's diverse Arab and South Asian communities. The second is because we dare to humanize Palestinians. We dare to recognize them as human beings who are subject to international law, and in the U.S. subject to the U.S. Constitution, the New Jersey Constitution, and other civil rights statutes. We have hosted a number of Palestinian academics and lawyers, including Rashid Khalidi from Columbia University, Joseph Massad from Columbia University, Laura Shiha from George Washington University, Noura Erakat from Rutgers University, George Bisharad from UC Hastings University, Omar Shakir from Human Rights Watch, and Raja Shahada from Al-Haq Human Rights Center. We do not shun, blacklist Palestinians because that is racist. So as a result, we are getting attacked. If you would like to watch their videos, then you can watch all their lectures on the CSRR YouTube channel. Finally, we demand equality of Muslims, Arabs, and South Asians. We will not accept being tokenized. We will not accept being model minorities. We will not accept anything less than equality under the U.S. Constitution, the New Jersey Constitution, and all civil rights statutes, among other laws. That causes racists to hate us. It causes them to want to attack us, to want to destroy us, and to want to get me fired and get the center closed. This is the United States of America that this is happening in, not some authoritarian state in some foreign country in the global South or global East. It is in our country. Now, who are the sources of these attacks on Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim professors? Well, there is four main sources. The first is New Jersey politicians, who are very actively, including U.S. Representative Josh Gottheimer, who has very actively attempted to close down the only academic civil rights center that counters Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism and anti-South Asian racism. We have also been very aggressively attacked by the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey. The National Zionist organizations have attempted to intervene and interfere with Rutgers University under the guise and weaponization of an incorrect definition of anti-Semitism, which is based on their incorrect definition is that any criticism of Israel, Israeli foreign policy, Israeli military policy, Israeli government policy, that constitutes anti-Semitism. Congress, the U.S. House Committee on Education and Workforce, and also the Senate Judiciary Committee have attacked the Center for Security, Race, and Rights and me by name. Now, I don't know why they are not spending their time on what they're supposed to be doing, which is to be elected in order to make this country thrive and to defend equality and the Constitution, but their hate is so strong that they waste taxpayer dollars, they abuse their authority in order to attack me and the Center for Security, Race, and Rights and Rutgers Law School and ultimately Rutgers University. And I also, of course, talked about the university administrators, Columbia, Harvard, UPenn, Northwestern, and many others. Now, just quickly, the lawfare that is being used, and I can't go into a lot of detail about Title VI of the 19th Civil Rights Act, but it does protect anyone who is a recipient of federal program, or excuse me, of programs and activities that receive federal funding, it protects those recipients of discrimination based on race, color, and national origin. And there is no exception to that. However, what you are finding in most universities, there's no attention paid to Palestinian students, faculty, and staff, while there is heightened attention granted to Jewish students, faculty, and staff. And so what I would proffer is, let's give heightened attention to both groups of people, rather than disparately treat and discriminate Palestinian, Arab, Muslim students, professors, and staff. Now, I will also note, because a lot of people don't know this, is that there is an executive order 13899 that was issued in December 11, 2019 by former Donald Trump, that if there should be a policy of the executive branch to enforce Title VI against prohibited forms of discrimination rooted in anti-Semitism as vigorously as against all other forms of discrimination. There is no such executive order for Muslims. Even though I'll put a plug in for my book, The Racial Muslim, I have argued that Muslim identity is racialized. And one of the reasons why that's become quite problematic in the higher education context is not only because universities receive a significant amount of federal funding, but also that the government, the US government, and the Committee on Education and Workforce wants to define anti-Semitism as including criticizing the Israeli military, criticizing the Israeli government, defending Palestinians' human rights, making the argument in the case that what Israel is doing in Gaza is a violation of the Genocide Convention, making a case that what Israel is doing in Gaza is a violation of multiple and numerous international human rights treaties and laws, and as a result is engaging in war crimes, and criticizing US foreign policy for providing over $20 billion to the Israeli military to engage in what many legal scholars have concluded is a genocide at worst, or at least a multiple war crimes at best. When you do this, even though it is part of your job as an attorney and as an international human rights lawyer, as a civil rights lawyer, you are then accused of anti-Semitism, and that is then used as a weapon to try to strip universities of their funding from the federal government. So let's just look very quickly at a case study of Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism so we can see the disparity in treatment. And let me just be very clear. I am not stating that Jews should not be protected by Title VI. They absolutely should be. What I'm arguing is that Palestinians should also and equally be protected by Title VI. So what we want is equality. We do not want to strip other communities of their rights. We want the same rights as those communities. So the objectives of Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim students, and I've listed it on the left-hand side, is to demand a ceasefire to Israeli military bombing, ethnic cleansing, and mass starvation of 2.4 million Palestinians in Gaza. They want to stop U.S. foreign aid to Israel. They want to divest from companies that provide military assistance to Israel. They want to defend academic freedom and free speech on academic campuses. And they want to protect Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim students from discrimination by Zionist students, professors, and external organizations. There is nothing in that list that says that these students, these faculty, these centers want to hurt Jews. The objectives of pro-Israeli Jewish and Zionist students is to support Israel's war on Gaza, presume all Palestinians in Gaza support Hamas and accuse them of being terrorist supporters, which is an Islamophobic racist trope, to label pro-Palestinian protesters as terrorist supporters, to interpret pro-Palestinian protest teach-ins and sit-ins and campus encampments as anti-Semitic, to presume that Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims hate Jews if they criticize Israeli state policies and practices, or dare to contextualize Palestinian-Israeli conflict within an academic intellectual setting, which is what universities are supposed to do, and they seek to discipline, expel, and prosecute pro-Palestinian students and faculty. Meanwhile, the responses have been wildly disparate to the disadvantage and the adversity of Palestinian students, Arab Muslim students, faculty, and professors. So again, you can see on the left-hand side all of the adverse acts that have been taken against the Palestinian Arab Muslim students and the responses in stark contrast to the pro-Israeli Jewish and Zionist students. So in a nutshell, if you're Palestinian, Arab, or Muslim, or their ally, you are subjected to disciplinary proceedings. You are subjected to new policies that severely restrict the time, place, and manner of campus activism, if not outright quash your free speech rights and academic freedom rights. You're subjected to mass arrests by police departments. You have delayed responses or no responses to violence by Zionist organizations against pro-Palestinian activists. You are subjected to violent removal of encampments, and there's absolutely no acknowledgement or recognition of the rise of Islamophobia or anti-Palestinian racism on college campuses and in American society. And of course, there are no task forces, or very few, that focus on Islamophobia, and I've yet to see one that focuses on anti-Palestinian racism. On the right-hand side, I won't read it, but it's right there on the screen. The pro-Israeli Jewish and Zionist students have received the most validation, support, protection by Congress, by university administrators, by donors, by many, many stakeholders who have power. And so that's the disparity. And then finally, I just want to highlight the obvious, okay? And this is why the Center for Security, Race, and Rights is being attacked, and why I'm being attacked. Because we humanize Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims. And if you look at the left-hand side, the dehumanization and racialization of these communities is so stark and so unacceptable. They are presumed to be untrustworthy. They are presumed not to feel pain, trauma, or vulnerability. They're presumed to be prone to violence and hate against others. Insincere, outsider, undeserving of respect or dignity, perpetrators of harm. Their preferences and requests are ignored, their experiences are dismissed or denied, and their mistakes are fatal. Meanwhile, if you are a Jewish student, a Zionist student, a pro-Israeli student, or faculty, or staff member, you are treated the complete opposite. You are humanized. You deserve to feel safe. You deserve to feel respected and have dignity. You are sincere and believable. You are a sympathetic victim. Your preferences and requests are prioritized. Your experiences are centered and taken seriously, and your mistakes are forgiven. And I support the humanization of Jewish, pro-Israeli, and Zionist faculty, student, and staff. But what we need to do is treat equally, with the same level of humanization, Palestinian, Arabs, and South Asian and Muslim students, faculty, and staff. And with that, I will end, and I'm happy to answer questions during our Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aziz. Dr. Donna Murch is up next.
Hi, everybody. I wanted to start just by thanking the Rutgers AAUP-AFT leadership and staff, and the leadership and staff of the PTLFC. We really need this event, and I'm really glad that we're having it to talk about both primarily the national, but also international context, as well as the local context of Rutgers. So I'm going to be going back and forth, I think, kind of between the national and the local context. Right now, I'm on the executive council of the National AAUP-AFT. I'm sorry, Rutgers is my representative union of the AAUP-AFT National, which went through an affiliation 2 years ago. And it's really hard. I feel like we have a front row seat on all the different types of repression. I'll put it back in the chat. Currently, the National AAUP-AFT has a blog, and the goal of this blog is for people to write about their individual experiences of repression, and individual and collective, and also how they're organizing against it. Because I think knowledge sharing across campuses and then through national and international networks is really important to how we resist. So we both can express solidarity campaigns for people that are getting fired and disciplined and silenced and, you know, intimidated into not teaching the things that they need to teach, as well as really kind of the attempt to influence and restructure curriculum. So I think we need to plan and organize about how to use solidarity to push back, because we have our local fights, we have our national fights, and we have our international fights. So I'm going to start just by talking a little bit of how I understand what's happening, both at national and at local. One of the very difficult things about this moment is that we have sustained, as Professor Schrecker laid out, long-term retrenchment, austerity, and really overt racism after the student movements of the 1960s and 1970s, which opened up public and to some extent also private universities to large numbers of people who looked different than the people who had attended higher education before. So you have your first real generations of Black students in the 1960s, and this is not just the South, this is also in the West and in the North. The establishment of the Equal Opportunity Program in order to give federal subsidies to universities to encourage and transform student bodies. But already in the 70s and 80s, we see retrenchment And that manifested itself also in the institution of fees at places like University of California and CUNY in New York in the 70s and 80s. So we have a longer story about people gaining access to and democratizing the university, and then the immediate backlash and retrenchment. I would argue that in this moment, unfortunately, we are entering a whole new phase. So we have that retrenchment of the 70s and 80s, but then particularly in the 90s, we begin to see this withdrawing of federal funding, which is the growth of student debt, as Professor Schrecker talks about. And then, of course, the 2008 financial crisis, which was utterly transformative in so many terrible ways. But it really rapidly skyrocketed both state and federal cuts. And I think under the George W. Bush administration, the deregulation of lending practices to students. So we have this neoliberal austerity, with the mushrooming of management, the institution, really the transition from tenure track jobs to contingent jobs, this kind of forward marching neoliberalization. And I would add that I lived through this period in graduate school and as a young professor. And I always thought about it in terms of structural adjustment. We saw these things being imposed in West Africa, especially in Liberia and in Ghana. And then we saw that what was called structural adjustment in the global South being applied inside the United States. So I think it's always good for us to peek out and look at the international context. One of the really frightening things about this moment is what people call the Palestine exception. That Palestine is an issue within domestic and international foreign policy that's treated like no other in this time period. It's made possible a coalition between the far right that has always been infuriated about the transformation, opening up of the university, wanting to eliminate Black studies, queer studies, women's studies, that democratization of the university, that's a long-term goal of theirs. But now it's been merged with Zionist liberal Democrats who suddenly can agree on how much they hate the university. And so I think that Professor Schrecker's point about this being much worse than McCarthy, I absolutely agree with that. And it's because we have almost a cross-party consensus, unfortunately. And the university is a place that is central to free speech. So I want to talk a little bit more about a specific examples, how this has played itself out. The passage of expressive policies. What we see at Rutgers is happening all over the country. These are violations of the First Amendment. And we would never have been able to have the kind of strike that we did with our sound system and drag shows and, incredible performance and unity in which the undergraduates could get involved because of expressive policy. We have to apply for permits, 3 days ahead. And we are going to be limited to these so-called free speech zones. So the expressive policies have profound implication for our encampments and our pro-Palestinian support, but honestly, for the future of all forms of campus activism, including the most basic rights to labor activism. So I find this utterly chilling. It is, it arises in a certain moment, and we see liberal Democrats supporting it because of the support for Israel and the fury about even the call for a ceasefire. So I am going to say some things at the end about the opportunities that this presents, but it's very sobering. We've had a lot of reports of repression. One thing I want to underline also from Professor Aziz's presentation, we're seeing the repression of Muslims, but also many of the people that are undergoing direct disciplinary procedures are Black and queer. So we have this interesting intersection with both, racism against Arabs of all religions, and then specifically targeted Muslims. But a lot of the domestic repression has been directed also at Black queer activists. And here I point to Stephen Thrasher, who unfortunately today has an ad hoc committee convened to discuss his firing before he can submit his tenure file. We also have Tiffany, let me make sure I get the name right. I'm terrible with names. Tiffany Willoughby Herard, who's at UC Irvine, who has been suspended and is currently in this gray area. So we're seeing different categories of vulnerability around this moment of repression. So it is actually a very broad category of people facing repression. At the National AAUP, there's a new committee called the Committee on Race and Solidarity, and we're spending time thinking about how we knit together both the anti-Palestinian racism and anti-Arab racism with domestic repression. I think that the periodizations are overlapping. You know, obviously Palestine didn't start, the debate didn't start last year. It also starts, especially in the US, I think, post 67, but also, of course, going back to 1948. Okay, I want to talk about Rutgers just a little bit in this context. The first thing is that I do think we're experiencing the post-strike repression. We really are. You know, we were able to win, what, $24.5 million increase in our appropriation, but the administration did not apply that to the raises, and it imposed this incredible austerity on SAS. I'm in the history department and have been for 20 years. We've been the top-ranked African-American history program for the last 25 years. And I'll just tell you, that's unheard of because of the ways that private programs have much greater resources to build. So having this subject and with this amount of investment was a beautiful thing, but it is truly under assault. And I'm really worried about our program. One of the things that this relates to is this systematic defunding of graduate programs in the humanities. And our new dean, Julie Wade, is really presiding over, I don't have to tell the PTLFC that, you know, this is the core fight we're facing, the restructuring and firing of people from the writing programs and people in the leadership and rank and file of the PTLFC. But even in the most resourced departments, and I think you could make the argument that history is one of the best resourced departments in Rutgers, we are being told that that if we want hires that are tenure track lines, that we have to negotiate it internally. So trying to pit us against one another by field. And, you know, we've had some ugly faculty meetings where I'm like, you know what, we need to focus on what's coming from above, not on one another. So I think that holding together solidarity is really important. And especially for those people that are involved in leading programs, tenured faculty in particular, do not volunteer to cut yourself. I just want to say that's so important. In history, we have people already anticipating different draconian things that are going to come down with this dominion of data and, you know, shrinking of resources for the graduate programs. So do not cut yourself. Fight back. Don't do their work for them. Don't anticipate it. And I think, you know, that's core to how we're going to resist both the political pressure and the economic pressure. So I want to make sure that we have time to discuss, but I do believe both nationally and at Rutgers, we're entering a new phase, that I no longer see the neoliberal metrics of Barchi, our previous president before Jonathan Holloway, whose message was always, you know, excellence, but efficiency. Meaning we'll fund portions of the university, we'll pit people against each other, but we still really care about our neoliberal metrics. I don't see this in our current dean of SAS. What I see is just a desire to cut. And the previous university she was working at has now a plan to eliminate some of their major humanities programs. In the history department, we're only admitting 7 students this year. In past years, when I first came, we were admitting 25. And I don't see how the graduate programs are going to survive under this level of austerity. So I do think this is a new phase, and we have to figure out how to think about it and also to prepare for the new president that's coming, because I expect it to be a really difficult and challenging time. Okay, so what is to be done? Well, one thing I think is that because of the horror of what's happening, and, you know, Rutgers, I always say it has this order where it's like the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. They have the specific departments or campuses that they privilege, but that system is breaking down now under extreme austerity. So I think that this gives us a chance to try to, you know, work together and recruit using our new organizing skills that we all learned from strike school and from the strike, to really build bridges with one another, that people who always thought that they could evade it, and this, I think this to some extent has been true in the history department. We were always well protected. Even in periods of austerity, we still had hires. But it's not looking good for the future, especially for our graduate program. So as bad as things are, it gives us an opportunity to organize. The second thing is I'll put a link back in the chat. I do think sharing our stories is so important. You know, at the National AAUP right now, we have only 24 employees. We're small. So, but we're trying to build and do more organizing. But I think getting the word out and sustained media campaigns by first starting with writing your own blogs about what you're facing in terms of repression and how you're organizing against it. I think that the goal of the blog is to incubate news stories that can be picked up by the higher education press to shine light on individual people and campuses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Murch. Our final speaker for today is Ms. Elyla Huertas. The floor is yours.
Hi, folks. I'm a senior staff attorney at the ACLU of New Jersey. And for those of you who don't know what we do, we've been around for more than 60 years, and our mission is to preserve, advance, and expand the individual rights and liberties guaranteed by the state and federal constitutions in courts, in legislature, and in our communities. So I've been an attorney at the ACLU for about 7 years. I'm a generalist, which means I've had the great pleasure of working on several issues in different issue areas. In the past, my work has included election protection work and reproductive freedom, but most of my work has been in the areas of youth and students' rights. So I've sent letters to school districts advising them on how they should be engaging students who want to plan walkouts in their school districts rather than discouraging them. I've also advocated against book bans in public school libraries and local libraries. And I've recently engaged in advocating for New Jersey school districts to keep in place policies that help protect trans and gender nonconforming students in schools. So now, as you can see, my work and experience has generally been from the perspective of students' rights. And a lot of this work has implicated the First Amendment and its corollary in the New Jersey Constitution. But I just want to say that I don't consider myself a First Amendment specialist, and less of my work has been from the faculty and staff side of things. And I say that just to say I certainly don't have all of the answers, but I'm happy to be here today to talk about my work from the perspective of the First Amendment of the federal and New Jersey constitutions. I'm also a 2010 graduate of Rutgers University and a 2017 graduate of Rutgers Law School, so this community has a very special place in my heart. So I'm excited to be a part of this discussion. All right, so turning to academic freedom, I know we've already heard about it extensively today, but I did want to just take a step back for those of you who might need a little bit more of a primer about what academic freedom and your rights to express yourself look like. Please note that what I'm saying to you today is not legal advice, and if you're concerned about a particular situation, please consult with a lawyer or your union. Okay, so to get started, first, a legal principle I want to remind you about is that our constitutional rights are about our relationship with the government. Our state and federal constitution limit what the states can regulate. And one reason I'm speaking with you today is because Rutgers, as has been already mentioned today, and as you obviously know, is a public entity. And as a public entity, it's required to comply with the Constitution. And so it's well known that the First Amendment of the Constitution is a source of protection for free expression. And as you know, the text says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. But we must not also forget that the New Jersey Constitution, specifically Article 1, Paragraph 6, is a source of protection for free expression as well. And what it states is that every person may freely speak, write, and publish their sentiments on all subjects. This is an independent protection for free expression. The federal constitution provides the minimum protection for individual rights, and states can step in and provide more. The New Jersey Supreme Court has described New Jersey's right of free speech as an affirmative right that is broader than practically any others in the nation. And as you know, turning to another source, collective bargaining agreements and contracts can provide more protections than the Constitution. So as far as Rutgers policies go, I know very little about what kinds of protections you've negotiated or about how Rutgers applies policy. So I won't be talking about that today. But what I can say is that as employees of a public institution, when you express yourself, one question is whether you are speaking as an academic associated with a public university where academic freedom principles apply, or as a resident or citizen speaking on a matter of public concern, where traditional First Amendment principles apply. So academic freedom protects you in your positions as faculty and is grounded in constitutional free expression principles. You've heard more about that from other speakers today, but I want to give you a little bit of the legal framework. So academic freedom covers the liberty to conduct research and draw conclusions rooted in that evidence, but it is not absolute. It is subject to a balancing against other competing interests. Our New Jersey Supreme Court, in a 1986 case called Snitto v. Rutgers University, has stated that the concept of academic freedom, though not a specifically enumerated constitutional right, long has been viewed as a special concern of the First Amendment. It goes on to explain that it is an essential freedom of universities. At its core, academic freedom grants teachers the ability to present relevant topics in the classroom, even if controversial, without fear of reprisal or censorship. This follows precedents from the U.S. Supreme Court that has recognized the direct connection between the vibrancy of speech in the classroom and the health of American society. In one of the early cases about academic freedom, Sweezy v. State of New Hampshire, the U.S. Supreme Court said that no one should underestimate the vital role in a democracy that is played by those who guide and train our youth. Teachers and students must always remain free to inquire, to study and to evaluate, to gain new maturity and understanding. Otherwise, our civilization will stagnate and die. In that case, Justice Frankfurter wrote separately to enumerate the 4 essential freedoms that must exist if universities are to thrive. What he said is, it is the business of a university to provide that atmosphere which is most conducive to speculation, experiment, and creation. It is an atmosphere in which there prevail the 4 essential freedoms of a university: to determine for itself on academic grounds who may teach, what may be taught, how it shall be taught, and who may be admitted to study. Now, we have these great legal protections, but like most of our rights, they aren't always respected in practice. I know academic freedom is a hot topic on campuses across the country, and one thing I can tell you is that there are very few lawsuits by professors about this issue in New Jersey. And in a recent case where my office was involved as a friend of the court or an amicus brief, the appellate court seemed hostile to the concept of academic freedom as it applied to individual professors. In that case, the professor has asked the New Jersey Supreme Court to take her case, and we're waiting to see the result. So remember that your contract and Rutgers policies may provide more clear protections around your academic freedom rights. And I'll leave it to your union colleagues to help you navigate your administration when you are concerned about intrusions on your academic freedom. So what does this mean for all of you? And I'm sure what you want to hear today is, what are you allowed to say? So as a general matter, if you are speaking as a private person, 1, as a private person, 2, about a matter of public concern, and 3, your speech does not interfere with your job, your speech should be protected. It is well established in the law that a public employee does not relinquish his or First Amendment right to comment on matters of public interest otherwise available to citizens simply as a result of the fact of public employment. Generally speaking, we're talking about speech that is of political, social, or other concern to the community, speech that would help the public make informed decisions about how government operates, not internal personnel disputes and grievances. The university should not, because of your speech, fire, demote, or suspend you, significantly change the terms and conditions of your employment, or take action that would deter a reasonable person from speaking. Courts have found that government employers act because of your speech, where the speech was a substantial motivating factor behind the adverse action. But government employers are always empowered to take an action against you for a legitimate reason, and they would be able to make the case that they would have done the same thing regardless of the protected speech at issue. Again, through your contract rights or through your policies and practices of the university, you may have greater protections regarding your speech as a private person. I would not be aware of that, and you would want to check with your union reps. And as I mentioned at the top, I do tend to focus on student and youth rights, and I imagine that some of you may get questions about what a student's rights may be in regard to free expression at the university. So I'll just quickly turn to that just for that reason. So the right to assemble and express your views through protest is critical to a functioning democracy and at the core of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Protesters have several protections under the First Amendment, but the government can place certain limits on individuals during a protest, like reasonable time, place, or manner restrictions. I'm very disappointed about learning about these free speech zones at Rutgers, but I'm sure they argue that it's an appropriate place restriction. I would argue that it is not. These weren't the case when I was a student, and they limit your ability to organize events like rallies and protests. And these things shouldn't impact your ability to share information, gather, and discuss things. And one important thing to know is that the government, or the university in this case, may not discriminate against speech based on viewpoint, which I'm sure you all know. So for example, if they allow students to put up flyers on a bulletin board, they can't remove some of them because of the views it represents. After I'm done, I'll share some protest materials in the chat in case they're helpful. And I do want to just say that if any of you believe your free expression rights have been violated, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll include a link in the chat for our organization's online complaint form. I think maybe you'll have my contact information as well, but I'll put those links in the chat. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you all today.
Oh, I guess it's jumping over to me. I thought Audrey would close out. I want to thank everybody. I think one of the things that I'm taking from this is that each of the individual presentations, I think, were just really amazing. I think, but I think what I found really valuable is hearing them together, and the context that they provide in unity kind of sums up where we are right now in this unfortunate moment. I'm going to say a couple things. I'm going to open it up to the floor. The first thing is that Dr. Murch had mentioned the blog. So I'm going to offer my services as a journalist. If you're unwilling to speak yourself on this, we can have a conversation and I can write something up, a blog post, and get your story out. So that's I think that what she's offering is really important. The second is that we want to keep to talk about what's going to come up next. We want everybody to have, if you have questions for the speakers, to ask them. We also want to encourage everybody to tell their stories now. We're not going to be recording the rest of this.